As the great scientist, publisher, bon vivant, diplomat, and patriot, Benjamin Franklin said in one of his famous little pithy sayings, "The only thing that is certain in life are death and taxes." Well, we all know that is the most God-honest, truthful thing that anybody has ever said, because neither one of them ever go away, right? Once there's a tax, there's always a tax. And death is death. And certainly, naturally, I think, we fear both of them, right? One is sort of temporary, the other one, at least to the eyes of the world, is permanent. And I think that's even true of those of us of faith, isn't it? Now one might say, well, that shows a lack of faith. And in a certain sense, in a very heroic way, that's kind of true. I think most people would say, who of faith would say, I'm not afraid of dying. Well, I'm not afraid of being dead. I'm afraid of dying. That's different, isn't it? Right? And there is certainly some merit to that argument, isn't there? You know, every once in a while, you hear these people all the time say, oh, that person had a beautiful death. I've been around a lot of dead folk, or people dying, right? I can only say that in one case, I think, where somebody really was just very peacefully faded away. Most people struggle. Why? Life. It's the first gift we're given and the last gift we give back, right? We hold on to it. We'll do anything, it seems, to hold on to it. As it should be, right? So what are we afraid of? I'll come back to that. There's a strange verse in the gospel today. It's the shortest verse, I think, probably, in the whole Bible, probably. 3 words. And Jesus wept. And Jesus wept. Why did Jesus weep? Now, the standard interpretation of this is totally wrong, right? Why did Jesus weep? Because his dear friend Lazarus was dead. No. I will prove it to you. And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, now whenever the Jews say anything, you know it's wrong. All right, I don't mean, that is not meant as an anti-Semitic trope. It's just a literary technique that John uses. John's gospel is full of references to the Jews. And he's talking about the leaders of the Jews. He's not talking about your average everyday, Abe on the street in Nazareth, right? He's talking about the leaders of the Jews, and they never get it right. Even after he's gone and dead, they never get it right. So again, not meant to be read as an anti-Semitic trope. It's just a literary technique that is used to show the opposition to Jesus, right? So the Jews said, see how he loved him. That's not why Jesus wept. Right? That's not why. Why then? Well, come back to where we started. The fathers of the church had some deep reflections on this. So here we have this. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He's looking at the tomb of a dead guy, right? Where else does Jesus weep? Garden of Gethsemane. Why? Obvious reasons. He knows where he's going. He knows what lays before him, right? He's not afraid of his mission, clearly, because he does it perfectly. But the road there isn't all that pleasant, is it? Right? And there's something even more. Why should there be, you might even say, an understandable, incredibly faithful fear of being dead? And again, this is where the fathers of the church come in. What happens when we die? Well, we don't really know, but we can talk about it in sort of symbols and metaphors, right? What happens when we die? The body, and we heard about this in the second reading from Romans, right? The body and the spirit are separated. Up to now, they've been united. You can't be a human being without a body. You can't be a human being without a spirit, soul. They're intimately entwined. Think to the Incarnation. We just celebrated the great feast of the Incarnation, Jesus' birthday yesterday, the Annunciation, right? The Spirit, right? In fact, the divine Spirit of the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, is incarnated into a human body, inseparable. This has huge theological issues, actually, if you think about it for a little bit. I don't encourage you to do that right now. Right? Do that later when you got a chance. Right? What happens at death? Those two are separated again. And we're not meant to be that way. We're not meant to have our spirit separated from our bodies. That is one of the effects of the fall. And indeed, once that spirit goes off, that body doesn't handle it very well. Right? Think back to even Mary, clueless Mary in this story. Right? She knows Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and it's hot. Right? You open that stone and it's not going to be pleasant. Right? The body decays really fast. Right? And it's not pretty in all kinds of ways, right? Once you separate the spirit from the body goes back to the dust. Right? But think about what we believe, what we're going to celebrate in 2 weeks from today. In the resurrection, the Spirit of Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, and his body are reunited in a glorified body that is free of the effects of the fall. A glorified body that will never corrupt, never die again. That's our faith. That's why the church, even today, makes a big deal about funerals. You know, funerals are dying. That's kind of funny, isn't it? You can laugh about it. Funerals are dying in a certain sense. You know, more and more, fewer and fewer people, especially faithful. This is a word to the grandchildren in the audience, right? Happens all the time in parishes. Some old lady, right, 95 years old, the pillar of the parish, right, been making pierogi, candy, selling raffle tickets for 75 years, dies. And you find out about it in the newspaper because her children had a celebration of life and not the funeral that grandma would have liked. That's really awful, isn't it? So all you younger people in the audience, pay attention to that. Your mom and your dad want a funeral. They don't want a party. Have the party later, that's fine. End of the commercial. Yeah, and I'm getting paid by the Funeral Directors Association to say that, so. Therefore, come back. Why does Jesus weep? He knows where he's going. He knows what the product of all this is. He sees Easter. But he faces that because as he is united, body and soul together, divine and human, the whole notion of being separated, body and soul, is terrifying. He knows where he's going, and he knows how he's going to get there. In a certain sense, when Jesus weeps today, it has nothing to do with Lazarus. It's all about a little Garden of Gethsemane moment. Right? But he keeps going. And in fact, the other thing he knows when he's looking at because think back at the beginning, and we used a short version of this because this is kind of long, but if you remember at the very beginning of the text of the story, I forget if it was even here today, but Jesus hears, oh, Lazarus is really sick. Now, what would you expect? If he really loved Lazarus all that much, what would he have done? He'd have like poof, disappeared and showed up in Bethany. Now, what does he do? He puts his feet up and says, we'll wait a little bit. 2 days. Lazarus dies. He allows Lazarus to die. It's only then that he goes. Right? Because he knows what he's going to do. Right? He's going to reunite Lazarus' spirit, which is not dead. This is another important point. Right? He doesn't make a new Lazarus. He reunites Lazarus' spirit and soul with that rotten body in the tomb. It would appear that after Jesus also fixed that up a little bit, so it wasn't like a fallen apart Lazarus coming out of the tomb, right? He knows what he's going to do. And he also knows what the ramifications of it are. This is the last straw for the Jews. And now Jesus, in the next 2 chapters down, we will hear on Holy Thursday night, the Last Supper, right? And by then, everything is in motion. He knows what's going to happen, right? The Last Supper immediately followed by the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He knows that if he does this incredible sign, that this is his end in this world as we know it. And he's entitled to weep, I think. Right? And in fact, unfortunately, it's like a chapter later, but it's a shame they don't stick it on the end of this. But what happens, what it says is, and this is really important, because of what Jesus does to Lazarus, everybody's going out to Bethany from Jerusalem to look at Lazarus, this guy that was raised from the dead. And therefore, to the Jews, Lazarus is incredibly problematic, and they want to kill him too. Right? Now, right after this, Jesus, I'm filling the gaps here, but right after this, Jesus goes off into the wilderness again. And it's only once he learns that Lazarus is the target of persecution that he willingly goes to Jerusalem. Right? He indeed does lay down his life for his friend. That's a powerful message. Right? We're blessed with faith. Right? We don't look at death the way the world, the folks out there who have no faith or little, see death. Death is not the end. The good news of this message is our spirits never die. Right? When we die, we are not deceased, we are departed. Very different words. means and they mean something totally different from one another. We are not deceased, we are departed. Right? And we will wait, whatever that means, for the final judgment, whatever that means. But we look forward to the resurrection of all the just, whatever that means. And hopefully it's that faith that keeps us going through the challenges of everyday life, even to the point of having to face the trials, sufferings, difficulties, the sadness of death itself.